We'll get started. My name is John Schlesselman. I work with, I'm a temporary employee with the Department of Natural Resources and Wildlife Management. And I spent the first 30 years of my career in manufacturing in Winona, not related to the outdoors at all. Matter of fact, I didn't have a window at my desk. And was constantly wishing that I was out here. And this is actually my first career choice when I was in high school. But I didn't choose that path. Uncle Sam did when I was in the military, chose electronics for me, and that's what I did most of my life. But my heart was in the outdoors. Today's talk is on the history of wildlife in Buffalo County is the title of it, but it's more of the history of wildlife in the area. And we'll be talking about sometimes further south and sometimes further north and things like that. And last night I was thinking of some kind of a prompt that I could give or show to you people to get you start thinking about something historical of the area. And I found this piece of wood. This is a peg from the logging days that held the boom together, that held the logs together while the rafts were going down. I'm going to let you take a look at it. Just pass it around and you can touch and feel it. It was dredged up in Fountain City.
I saw a lot of them logs for Leo Smith that he dug them up on the river.
Yeah, yeah.
With the holes in them.
I went on the internet this morning and just what happened this day in history in the state. In 1885, Vice President visits Ashland. On this date, the death of Ulysses S. Grant cut short the visit of the Vice President Thomas Hendricks. The Vice President arrived in Ashland via steamship China in 1885. While the Vice President Hendricks was in Ashland, he and his wife enjoyed trout caught in the Brule River and Fish Creek. So there's what happened 125 years ago or so. I also went on the internet and found out what a Chautauqua was. I wasn't really quite sure. What was a Chautauqua? Theodore Roosevelt called it the most American thing in America. Woodrow Wilson described it during World War II or World War I as an integral part of the national defense. William Jennings Bryant deemed it a potent human factor in molding the mind of the nation. It was founded in 1874 by a businessman, Lewis Miller, and a Methodist minister, and then later a bishop. Chautauqua's initial incarnation was in the western New York state of Lake Chautauqua. The programming first focused on training Sunday school teachers, but quickly expanded. I thought that was kind of interesting. To understand the history of wildlife in Buffalo County and in the area in general, we have to go back in history a little bit, and we heard quite a bit about it with the last speaker on the Indians, and that's where it really starts. Indians shaped this landscape drastically over the years through the use of fire. The first explorers coming to this area came by Green Bay, and they were French explorers. They were coming here to set up trading posts because of the value of furs, not only beaver but other furs of the area. They came up the Fox River into Lake Winnebago and then up again into the Fox River to portaged a mile and a half overland to the Wisconsin River, down the Wisconsin River to where it joins the Mississippi at Prairie du Chien, and then up the river, up the Mississippi. Coming up the Mississippi, they could travel 20 to 25 miles a day, and generally you were paddling one type of canoe or another, not necessarily always birch bark, but some type of double-ended boat. Nicholas Perot, it was considered, or is considered by some, to be the first resident of the area. He established a winter camp at Trempealeau in 1885. And later he established a fort there, which is actually another name for a trading post. The next spring of 1685, he established a trading post called St. Antone, and that was located somewhere near the foot or the delta of the Chippewa River between there and Pepin. The site hasn't been documented. I'm sure some of you may have more information than I have, but the books I had couldn't pinpoint the exact location of that trading post. Some of the early explorers that were here was kind of a who's who in explorers, I think. It was kind of neat to have all these explorers traveling up the river past Elma through Buffalo County. Jean Nicolet, Marquette, Joliet, LaSalle, Father Hennepin, Duluth, and later Zebulon Pike and John Carver. I have most of what I'm going to tell you today are quotes out of books that I've read and looked at. Carver wrote in 1766 on his way up the river. He says, "The land betwixt the mountains and on their sides is generally covered with grass, with few groves of trees interspersed, near which large droves of deer and elk are frequently feeding. And in many places pyramids of rocks appeared resembling old ruinous towers and other amazing precipices. And what is very remarkable, whilst this scene presented itself on one side, the opposite side, I'm assuming the Minnesota side, of the same mountain was covered with the finest herbage, which gradually ascended to its summit." So what that's telling me that what I'm trying to set is a picture of what it looked like in this area in Buffalo County, to understand what kind of animals were here and how they lived and survived. What he's telling me is that on the north slopes were generally wooded areas, and on the south-facing slopes were generally grassed. And that makes a little sense in the fact that the burning that the Indians didn't take hold so much on the north side because of the cooler temperatures of the ground around it versus the sun-baked side of the south side of the hill, where the fires could take hold and burn much hotter. Sure, they burned here on the north side, but it would burn much cooler and not necessarily kill the woody plants. He talks about verdant plains, fruitful meadows, and numerous islands. And in the lake, talking about Lake Pepin, is about 20 miles long and 6 miles in breadth. In some places it's very deep and abounds with various kinds of fish. Great numbers of fowl frequent also this lake and rivers adjacent to it, such as storks, swans, geese, brants, and ducks. And in the droves are found great plenty of turkeys and partridges. On the plains there are large buffaloes largest buffaloes of any in America. Here I observed the ruins of a French factory where it was said that Captain Pierre resided. And that's the fort or the trading post that I just talked about. The first steamboat came upriver in 1823. It left Prairie du Chien and arrived in St. Anthony. St. Anthony Falls, it's the furthest you can get on the Mississippi at that time, without the locks and dams, on May 10th in 1823. And then the first settler in the county was Thomas Holmes, the founder of Fountain City, in 1839. We have to talk again on habitat and what it was like here in Buffalo County and the surrounding area. And habitat is described as food, water, shelter, and space. Space is a a term that's probably not always associated with habitat, but I think it's a very important part describing Buffalo County. Space meaning some animals like the buffalo and elk need roaming areas to roam in, and large areas to roam in. And space also can mean space between animal and humans, for instance. Some animals are very shy of humans and don't do well close to humans, and others have adapted to humans very much so, like deer or geese. Geese think it's great. They've adapted to lakes in the middle of cities, and where else is a better place to have a nice mowed lawn where you can poop and have people feed you and go swimming in a lake that has hardly any predators in it. So what better place can you have? So they're pretty smart animals. Ever since the melting of the last glaciers, man has occupied this land. I think the last speaker probably told you that, and I didn't catch the very beginning of it, but we're going to talk, he did mention the Mississippi period, and that's where we're going to pick it up at. And that was between 1000 AD and 1600 AD, or maybe a little bit later than that. It was made up of the Chippewa and Winnebago Indians in the book that I read, anyway. And they were basically farmers and hunters. So they were talking about farming. The Indians didn't have any tools to use to break up the ground or clear the brush or do anything, except they had one very important tool, and that was fire. They used fire as their main means of clearing the land and keeping the land clear. It also provided fertilizer for their crops that they grew. And some of the crops they grew, you heard of the large communities that the Mississippi Indians had. Well, some of these fields, believe it or not, were up to 200 acres in size. They were huge. And they raised crops of corn, beans, squash, and in the book I read, tobacco. Their fields, let's see, and also fire was used to drive game. And it was used by the white settlers too. The first white settlers used fire to drive game, deer or whatever, out of marshy areas or grassy areas. And another interesting, I thought was an interesting use of fire was the controlling of wood ticks and mosquitoes. Where you take away their habitat. One tree being not more than 50 or more than 50 feet from another tree. So it was a mature woods as you walk through, nothing like we have here. That would be a forest, and oak savanna would be a much more open with grassy areas in between. Large open, let's see, the trees survived in wetter areas like river bottoms and in the valleys and creeks. The Indians preferred in this area to plant their corn in the river bottoms. They girdled the trees to kill the trees and then burned the rest of the forage underneath, and then were able to plant the corn because it's relatively fertile soil and damp year-round. So like a summer like this, they didn't have to haul water to try to get their crops to grow. And in the 1700s, France gave up this area to the English. And the English, and that was kind of a, from the 1700s was kind of a turmoil type era for the Indians, American Indians in this area. The English signed treaties, and there were more traders coming into the area. And tribes started to migrate and move, sometimes on their own, sometimes forcibly, to different areas of the state, including here in Buffalo County. As settlers came, the fires used by the Indians slowly disappeared, and the woody plants started to take over. So there were still some prairie areas, but they were encroached. In the Chippewa River bottoms, where I worked quite a bit in Tiffany bottoms, we try to maintain these open prairie areas, and we use fire very effectively to do that when we are allowed to build. And otherwise, we cut them trees, and the root systems actually they were right there where it goes through the smaller trees killed. and we maintain that open area. It's very intensive work, can't burn all the time. There's one part here that I thought was very interesting to me. I'm going to sort of take a little time and read it. It's on Pike. Zebulon Pike is the Pike's Peak fame. Pike's Peak in Colorado was named after him. He passed through Buffalo County in 1805. Pike passed Buffalo County and Pepin counties September 15th, 16th, 14th, 15th, and 16th in 1805. Saturday, September 14th, Pike and several companions landed below what is now called Winona, or Wapashaw's Prairie, for a hunt, while others with their boats continued upriver. Pike and the hunters ascended Sugarloaf, which is a man-made rock pedestal. It's a part of a stone quarry, but it's now called Sugarloaf, and followed the crest of the Minnesota Bluffs to Minnesota City, where they descended and made their way across the sloughs and morasses to a point opposite Fountain State, where the boats were already at anchor, waiting for them. That night was spent at the mouth of Eagle Creek. What makes that interesting to me is that's where I live. That's pretty cool. Major Stephen Long passed the rivers and made a note that the prairie opposite the mouth of Deep River, the grand encampment of the Indians, would be a suitable place for stationing of soldiers, which never happened. Just to give you an idea of the population of Wisconsin, in 1830, not that long ago, maybe 170 years ago, 75, the population in the entire state was 3,200 people. Here's a news story. 3,200 people, and 20 years later it was 305,000, and 30 years after that it was 1,300,000. It grew very, very fast. And a lot of the pioneers, during the French occupation, beaver was very important. We're going to get into some of the animals now. We're starting with beaver. And during the French occupation, beaver was very important. Beaver were traded in most parts of the state, including here. In 1734, produced an awful lot of beaver. And those pelts had to be bundled and shipped downriver by canoe, sometimes to Louisiana, and sometimes down to the Illinois River and up towards Chicago. But mostly in the beginning it was down the Mississippi, up the Wisconsin River, portaged over the portage at Portage, Wisconsin, and down the Fox to Green Bay, put on another ship, probably a sailing craft of some type, and shipped east. Its trip eventually ended up in Europe. And as you've heard when you were growing up, the pelts were gathered by the Indians and traded for guns and whiskey. What I've read, unfortunately, by 1800 there were beaver left in the area. And the methods to use to gather beaver was kind of interesting. Carver wrote in 1619 in Chautauqua, the ice over beaver run leading from a lodge, and a net was placed in the run. And then the Indian went over and chopped a hole on the beaver house itself, startling the beaver so it would run or swim out of the lodge, down the run, and then get entangled in the net where it was pulled out. In summer, Indians would use deadfalls, using which is a very heavy object suspended over a triggering mechanism with bait underneath it. The beaver chomps on the bait, pulls on the bait, releases the trigger, and this heavy object falls on top of the Indian, or on top of the Indian, hopefully, but on top of the beaver. And later, Cook was a prolific writer and kept good notes. In the Gilmington area, he had a farm right on this. Wrote that he used a dog. And beaver not only are winter in the typical house. They also will dig a hole and a run into a bank in winter there also. And that's what he's talking about here, is that kind of thing. He had a dog that could sniff out the beaver, and he would chop a hole in the ice and send the dog to the bank and have the dog start digging at the bank where the beaver was kept, chasing the beaver, again startling the beaver swimming out the beaver run, and then he would spear it. So he used the spear. Cook lived near Gilmington in 1856, settled there in 1856, and wrote that beaver can be found in all creeks and that there are 3 dams on my property alone. In 1866, 2 trappers trapped 69 beaver on the Beaver River. And another quote, an Indian took 50 beaver from the Trumbull River in 1843. About a turkey. Turkey, I found was very difficult to get a good handle on the understanding of the population of turkey in the area at the time of the early explorers, because the name turkey was often confused with other birds through translations and understanding of what they were actually seeing, because a lot of animals, birds that were seen at the time by the early explorers had never been seen by them before, and never described them. And for instance, Hannah wrote, on his way up the Mississippi, he saw many turkeys on Lake Pepin. Well, what he actually saw were geese. Turkeys obviously aren't on Lake Pepin, but the author deduced that through further reading his memoirs that they were actually geese and not turkeys. Many of the, let's see, St. Pierre was the post commander at Fort Trimple, the trading post there. Then on May 16, 1736, a party of Sioux Indians were traveling down the Mississippi for the purpose of hunting turkey. They used the wing feathers for their arrows. This indicates to me that turkeys weren't present in the area, especially in the mid-1700s. But then Jonathan Carver, on the other hand, in 1766 describes Lake Pepin, where he wrote, "We read that, and the lake abounds with various kinds of fish, great numbers of fowl, frequent the lake and rivers, and droves are found a great plenty of turkey and partridges." So I would say that there's a 50-50 chance there were turkeys here. They were definitely in Wisconsin, but not maybe as prevalent here in this part of the country, the state. In any case, the turkey disappeared from southwestern Wisconsin in the early 1800s, and the last turkey spotted was in Lucas County in Wisconsin in 1910. And another interesting thing is that this book was the History of Buffalo County, printed in 1888, doesn't mention turkeys at all as far as birds seen in the county. So it's another indication that they may not have been so prevalent here. But it's always possible. And one of the first stuff everything in the state was in 1887. And it hadn't been until the 1980s, late 70s that the turkey population was actually successfully reintroduced, and now you know we have turkeys all over. Another interesting I felt was an interesting animal or bird to talk about. It was a passenger pigeon. They were a migratory bird coming to Wisconsin and nesting in the summer. Passenger pigeon numbered in the hundreds of millions. I'm sure you've all heard that. And I always wondered, now, how in the world such a prolific, high population of birds could they possibly disappear entirely from the face of the earth? I think might be a good answer for it. Hundreds of millions in the state in the 1870s. The primary from the white oak and the bur oak. They also ate, they were opportunists and ate wild seeds of many other plants also. That was in the wild, and in settlers came to their fields with corn, sowing the grain by throwing it out on the surface of the ground, and the pigeons would come in flocks and those seeds, as well as the grain grew, they still fed on it. But one indication is that of the downfall of the passenger pigeon was that they laid one egg. And they may have laid, in what I've read, maybe had 2 nestings, maybe 3 nestings a year. That's not substantiated. And both parents incubated the egg. While one parent incubated the egg, was on the nest, the other partner would be out feeding, and vice versa. So they took turns. So if one bird was shot or was injured, was unable to return to the nest was abandoned. They nested in mass. There were millions and millions of birds. They nested in mass, 20 to 50, according to the book I read, 20 to 50 nests per tree. And the nesting was always in a long, narrow stretch. And the reason for that, if this mass of birds would nest in a circle, the birds that nested in the center of the circle had to fly too far for food and return back to the nest. So the theory is that that's the reason they nested in long. In 1848, a paper in La Crosse wrote, the nest sited below La Crosse extended for 45 miles. 45-mile long nest site, and the width were about. The Rand newspaper in 1871 reported a small nest site 9 miles on the river, that's 5 miles north of Durand on the Chippewa River. They have to be very familiar with it because they camp there quite a bit. The Durand paper said it contained 7 million birds in this nest site. The La Crosse Democrat paper stated wild pigeons for the last few days have been flying over the town in such numbers as to frequently darken the sun like a cloud. Their flight was from the northeast to the southwest. Market hunting took its toll on the birds. Netting, the last presenter was talking about net stones and trapping the birds. The Indians may have been trapping passenger pigeons because the white people also use netting and shooting as the primary method of gathering these pigeons. The La Crosse Leader, another newspaper, reported in 1871 that during the past 10 days, 3,120 dozen pigeons were shipped from La Crosse to New York City. Multiply that out, that's 37,000 birds in 10 days.
John, you want to use the microphone, John?
Yeah.
You can use that one right there. It's not on, but just turn it on.
I'm going to lose my voice if I don't use this. In 1887, the nesting was attempted near Wautoma, but shooting soon broke it up. Another report in 1895, 150 birds were seen in Madison. You can tell the drastic decline if the newspapers are reporting the few birds that are being seen, that the end is near. In 1899, it was marked the end of the passenger pigeon in the country. The prairie chicken and sharp-tailed grouse were prevalent here in Buffalo County in the 1800s. And Marquette, as early as 1675, passed this area, and his party survived on prairie chicken during that winter. Cook of Killington wrote that prairie chicken and sharp-tailed grouse were in abundance. At La Crosse in 1861, this is probably getting kind of boring. I'm just reading these facts, and I think a lot of people think that history is really boring, and this is probably why.
Yeah.
But I'll try to walk around a little bit. And in 1861, it was reported that every morning prairie chickens were flying over the city, affording fine sporting for gunners. There was a spike in population as the settlers came. And the reason for that was the cessation of fires set by Indians. What held the prairie chicken population in check were these fires. The Indians would burn these prairies where prairie chicken and the sharp-tailed grouse were laying their eggs on the ground. Fires would come, wiping out the nest, controlling the population. So without the fires and still having quite a bit of open prairie area, the population exploded. Their habitat increased. Habitat is extremely important to all species, including humans. The attempts that we make with the DNR to create habitat for all different types of animals and birds, turkeys, and well, any kind of Mississauga rattlesnake, any kind of attempt is welcomed by that particular species. And any of you that have any property and can read up on how to improve your property to promote species of one sort or another, whatever your fancy is. As prairies disappeared and became farmland, so did the prairie chicken and sharptail. Market onion didn't help either. One account states that a hunter sold 2,440 birds in Chicago for $1.25 a dozen. Black bears, this isn't really it. Black bear were present here and still are present here. As far as the early explorers went, they saw black bear. And Bunnell, the Bunnell House, historic house in Winona, Bunnell was a early settler in the area. In 1845 he wrote, "Found bears quite numerous in the cross area when food was scarce." That indicates to me that the bear were probably migrating and wandering around much like they do today, looking for food and easier living. Sometimes the younger bears will be kicked out of the area of their parents. I'm involved with the DNR, and we do for the last 2 years have been doing some bear surveys in Clark and Jackson County. And that's a home range of the bear. They're southern, probably the most recognized southern boundary in Wisconsin is in the Black River Falls area. And that's not very far from here, so it's not inconceivable for bears to wander from Clark and Jackson County into this area, like they've always done. He further wrote that they were known, this is Bummel again, further wrote that they're known as the traveling bear, moving from place to place. And what I'm assuming from what I read about the bear population fluctuates like all animals populations do, but it seems to be probably about the same as it was during the early explorers and settler times. There may have been more.
Sir?
Yes?
Why doesn't Buffalo County have more black bear? I mean, you would think, why doesn't Buffalo County have more black bear? You think we have a pretty good habitat here.
Yes, we do have a very good habitat, and it's starting to increase. If you would look at 25 years and previous, farming practices have changed drastically since then. And now the woods are not pastured anymore and covering and creating an awful lot of habitat for these wild animals. That's why we have rumors of cats of all different kinds and bears in this area, and it's just an increase in habitat again.
Okay, just coming back.
And that really goes for deer too. I mean, it's almost perfect for deer. As far as buffalo go, prior to 1800, the southern and western parts of the state was considered buffalo country, the home range of the buffalo. It was carried, again, it was mostly covered with prairie areas and oak openings and oak savannas. This is ideal for habitat for buffalo. Sioux Indians killed 2 buffalo. This is a report. I don't have the author of this memoir, but Sioux Indians killed 2 buffalo on the Trumbull River in 1832. And they were believed to be the last ones east of the Mississippi. I have an article here, some memoirs of Radisson. Radisson was another early explorer. I assume the same Radisson as Radisson Hotel Change, I don't know. Just recognize the name. In the fall of 1661, Radisson stated found in certain localities along the Mississippi River, from Lake Pepin to the Wisconsin River, Buffalo River in Buffalo County perpetuates their former abundance. Henry wrote, he mentions the river Trempealeau. And he stated that it was so called from, I can't read French, and I'm not sure if that's a Trempealeau or Buffalo River. It's in French. It stated that it was so called, apparently it was the Buffalo River, that large numbers of buffalo are ordinarily found there. It was described as skirted by mountains, but these were sufficiently distant in places to leave prairies. The Indians with him made a hunt on this river, returning laden with meat. He also mentions some 60 buffaloes with their young crossed a river. And I don't know if that's the Trempealeau or the Buffalo River, or Beef and Buffalo River. I still can't get that straight. I think it's north of Highway 10, it's the Buffalo River, and south of Highway 10, it's the Beef River, or vice versa. LaSalle wrote in a letter in 1682, he mentions that the river, Buffalo River, owed its name to the large numbers of the buffalo found there. And in 1699, LeSueur, I assume the LeSueur of LeSueur, Minnesota, described large buffalo, a beautiful river coming down from a great distance and flowing at its mouth from the north. This was so-called bonskewers from the great number of bison, bears, and deer found there. The river has been identified as the present Chippewa River. Long, another early explorer, not that early, it was in 1817, states that buffaloes, while not numerous on the river Buffalo, were still hunted there by the Indians at all seasons. And many times during what I've read, the Chippewa River Valley was considered the best hunting grounds for the Indians. In any contact that the early explorers had with Indians, always mentioned the Chippewa River. The Chippewa Valley was unquestionably the greatest game region in the state, writes Carver. Carver ascended the river in June of 1767 and observes large droves of buffaloes and elks than in any other part of his travels. He describes the land along the river as very level for 60 miles and clothed with fine meadows. And I assume those meadows are, again, from the burning. The country is almost void of timber up to Chippewa Falls, but rugged and heavily timbered beyond. So 1832 is the last of the buffalo in our area. I read a little bit about otter. Otter being my favorite animal. Very supple skin, very fun-loving animal, and fun to watch, fun to observe. It seems that otter have the relative same numbers as man. Otters travel up to 7 or 8 miles in a night looking in search of food. So if you see an otter track and you want to find its den, you might be in for a long walk in winter. There happens to be an otter den near where I live in Fountain City, and I keep an eye on it quite a bit. It's really a fun animal to watch. Elk is the next animal. It must have been just beautiful seeing elk around here. I always thought that we had elk in this area because of the name of Elk Creek, Little Elk Creek, and Elk Creek, the town of Elk Creek. And I was right in researching for this talk. Elk were plentiful prior to 1830. Cook of Gilmington wrote in 1856 that the Sioux crossed the Mississippi to hunt in this country on account of the abundance of game. The last speaker spoke about the Indians crossing. One question from the floor was, did the Indians cross the river? Well, apparently some did cross the river. The Sioux were pretty notorious, feared Indians, so they probably didn't have much to fear when they came across the river to hunt. In the winter of 1856, Cook wrote, "We often saw elk cross the valley, always led by a bull. He would take a few jumps and stop. The cows would follow, jumping in the bull's tracks left in the snow." In Trimble County, the elk were found in abundance along the entire length of the Trimble River. Harvey Brown killed a few elk during the winter of 1856 in Buffalo County. In 1862, one elk was killed out of a drove of 10 in northern part of Buffalo County. Pursuit of the others was abandoned on account of a severe storm. Then in 1888, a man, Kissing, wrote that in 1888 the elk were once common but now extinct. Another account states that the last one was shot in 1866. So the advent of the white man into the area and the agricultural move and the loss of the prairies I believe, contributed to the loss of the buffalo and the elk. Moose is the next one. Schoolcraft, another early settler, in 1831, I don't know if he was necessarily a settler or an explorer. I'm not going to call him, I don't know what he was. It doesn't say. Anyway, he wrote that tracks of elk and moose were numerous on the shores of the Red Cedar River north of Durand. Red Cedar runs from north of Menominee, through Menominee, over the dam, and then just north of probably 8-9 miles north of Durand, it enters the Chippewa River. And another story says some Indians told him, Schoolcraft that was, they saw a moose by a mill on the Red Cedar about 20 miles above the junction of the Chippewa. This is believed to be the southernmost part of the range. So the moose weren't in this area. They were just north of here. Cougar, on the other hand, ranged from the southern edge of the pine forest that would have been probably lying through the latitude of Chippewa Falls and on south into the Oak Savannah region of western Wisconsin. Their primary food was deer, and boy, they sure would have a feast today. Carver mentions seeing a cougar on an island on the Chippewa River in 1767. And Fonda, another early explorer, settler, tells of shooting one on an island near Trempealeau in 1839. So this is home range to the cougar, and if you hear rumors of cougar in this area, it's very possible that they're here, still here. Then we get to deer. Deer have always been an important large game for the first settlers. They depended on them for food and clothing. Deer hides were marketed in the 1700s for their hide in great numbers. Deer have a remarkable recuperative power, and you can see that by the number of deer we have around here today. It wasn't long ago that we had closed seasons on deer because there weren't that many. Radisson wrote in 1661, the weather continues 3 days. 3 days. This is a snowstorm he's talking about. And we needed no rackets, snowshoes, for the snow hardened them much. The small stags are as if they were stakes in the snow after they made 6 or 8 capers, leaps. It's an easy matter for us to take them by cutting their throats with our knives, meaning that the deer were exhausted and in the deep snow they couldn't move very fast. Harvey Brown wrote, about Christmas of 1857, a crust of snow about a ½ inch in thickness formed on the deep snow in Buffalo County, and that nearly every deer perished. The following spring thaw, their bodies were found in nearly every coulee. The traffic in venison became enormous in the later part of the 19th century. Lumbering camps bought deer carcasses directly from professional hunters. For example, the winter of 1868, James Terry engaged to hunt deer for John Sterling, who had 2 camps on the North Fork of the Eau Claire River. Said that he received, James Terry received his board and $4 for each deer he shot. Up to the 1st of January, he had killed 38 deer and 2 bear. Local consumption of deer was comparatively small until the construction of the railroads. Railroads provided an easy transportation to the large cities. And the reason that was important was because of the fact that they could get the meat to market before it spoiled much faster, and it was obviously faster than the paddle boat. And Cook writes, again in 1855, deer are plentiful. The county is a favorite hunting grounds for the Indians. Mr. Bump of Mondovi killed 11 deer in 3 days of hunting in 1869. Trumbull County Bummel wrote that in 1842 deer were abundant. James Reed took his rifle and was gone from the cabin only a few minutes before returning with a deer. Reed remarked that the bluffs are full of deer, though they hide at this season of the year. And Bummel wrote in 1890, few deer remain in the country. I typed out a list of just game laws that help to preserve the deer and bring them back. And the first law was in 1850. The deer season was all year long with no limit or no license needed. In 1851, a season was set from July 1st to January 31st, 7 months. In 1859, it was reduced to 6 months. In 1860, it was 5 months. And set guns were prohibited. That's a set gun, to me, means that a line was strung across a deer trail, a gun was strapped to a tree or some other object, and as a deer crossed, triggered the gun and shot the deer. 1876, I'll just kind of skip through some of these. The sale of venison was prohibited during closed seasons, and no hunting with dogs. And in 78, nets and spring guns were prohibited. Do you know what a spring gun is?
Yeah.
What is a spring gun?
They use them for bear and they use them for coyote. I've seen them sold out in South Dakota, but they're, this would be a conversation piece to buy one and bring it back. But
What do they look
for,
like?
for the coyote, they just put a bait on there, and when he bit on that, it shot him. And the bear, they hung it up in the tree, and when he reached up to get it, it shot him in the head.
Huh.
No, for deer, I don't know.
Okay, great. So I learned something. Venison sold for 5 to 6 cents a pound in '79. The first license fee was issued. License was issued in 1897 for $1, and 35,000 licenses were sold and harvested 1,900 deer. In 1907, Buffalo and Trumbull counties were closed to deer hunting.
Does it say where the deer came from in Buffalo and Trumbull County?
No.
They came from Furnick's Park in Arcadia.
Oh, from the park?
The water of the Temple River got so high that he had to turn them, leave them go. And that's where the first deer were, from the first hunting seasons was here, was down around the Dodge and along the Temple River.
Huh. I know when I was a kid, hunting was pretty limited there. You were very lucky and fortunate to see a deer, let alone shoot one. Not like it is today. The population of the deer, and like all mammals, fluctuates drastically with the influence of habitat. The influence of habitat is being again influenced by humans, mostly, and weather, the food supply. The first deer tag was issued in '32 for $1. Conservation Congresses started in '33. First bow hunting season was in '34. And '38, .22s, rifles, and .410 shotguns were prohibited. Buckshot was prohibited in '39. The white deer was protected in '40. Back tags were required in '42. Buckshot was legal again in '43 and again illegal in '44. Red clothing was required for the first time in '45. Crossbows were prohibited in '46. The first any deer season since 1919 was in 1950. License cost $2.50. The first hunters were required to register deer at checking stations in '53. Now Buffalo County went from a closed season in the early 1900s to Buffalo County has the state's second highest deer harvest total. And '57, the license cost $4. Sportsman's license $10. In '62, Buffalo County led the state in deer harvest. And in '66, no hunting from elevated devices. Deer stands that are up in the trees, which is now illegal again. And hunter safety program started in '67, and blaze orange required in '80. And handguns were allowed in '84, and the first muzzleloader season in '91. Just a bunch of trivial facts and figures, and that's all I have. And I don't know, how long did I take? No,
Pretty good.
When I started.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, any questions? I have some books here. Yes.
Well, I happen to be an 18 year, and there was a custom pursue before they were driven out of Wisconsin to meet down here at the Y, and they would stay there for about 4 weeks. There's a delicacy there, turtle eggs. Do you remember that? That's been mentioned off and on, hasn't it?
Yeah. Turtle eggs was.
That was a long time back.
I've never tasted turtle egg, but I may never.
I never before my time, but I remember that's what, and then they would stay until they left enough for the next season. Just
Sure.
for soup.
Yeah, you dig out the turtle nest. Turtles lay their eggs in a hole they dig in the ground, and in sand and soft ground mostly, and then they cover them up just like an alligator does, or anything. I'm sure you've seen them on educational television. And yeah, you could easily dig them up. You can easily find them and dig them up. And if you left enough seed there, it would be great. But I'm sure it's illegal to
Sister
do.
started our genealogy in '34,
Uh-huh.
and there's the Ebersolers, were the Swiss. The rocks were the fur traders that came down, four grandfathers, and all married Indians. The first two, Chippewa, Ojibwa, and the second two were Sioux. And my grandmother was married fur traders. And they got along good with the fur companies up in Canada, the first ones. They were oarsmen, first one or two. And they got along good because they could speak, they could transfer French into Indian, Indian to French, because they had Indian wives.
Wow. That's
And
cool.
the first Sioux was a sister to, no, the second Chippewa was a sister to Chief Waukesha. Her and her sister either left the Chippewa or were abducted, and ended up, one of them ended up as a wife of Chief Waukesha, one of the Chief Waukeshas. And it's this year I have a thing here that I might be interested in, a deed thing. What time do you get out of here?
I'm finished.
You wanna look at this? I'll
Sure,
show
sure.
you the genealogy of the Indians.
This is the one you brought into the office one day?
I did, didn't the long one? Yeah. And I took it to school, and one of the little girls was in school that day. Now, this is my sister makes these, made them. She was married to one of the Bantas that used to have brothers to one of the folks used to nail, but he ended up in Genoa. This is, and since that, we got the another generation from up in Scottish, French, Canadian. Before this, but she made this. This has This is there's an Augustine rock, ROC, first, before this one. And he married a Sioux, and it was, wait a second, let's tip this over. Yeah, here we are. And he married a Chippewa. The first guy married a Chippewa. His son is Joseph St. Roch, as ROC to start with. And then he was St. Roch, Low Rock, and Low Rock, and so forth.
ROC,
And this-
QUE, that's what I remember seeing.
And this is the second Chippewa, or Ojibwa, whatever nation. This, you will find this, this particular, that said is a maiden, Indian maiden. This, they had a bad year up there one year, and they were up across from Mackinac. And by spring, they took slips, and it got to the point where they took slips, and they took, and they picked their one, and some had to be liberated. And when the others came back and found that out, they took this bunch out of commission. So anyway, now this is another Chippewa, and this was a son. That was a son of this one. This is a son of this one. This is Augustine the Elder. Now this is the one we were relanding. I don't know, it was last Sunday or Sunday before, and this is the guy that had the first trading shanty in Reed's Landing before Reed's. And he was sent out, of course. He was an oarsman, came down to Wisconsin and went to Perdesheen, and they wintered in Perdesheen. And the fur traders, French Canadians, were after these guys because they could speak, they could interpret Indian to French and French to Indian. So they had an in.
You know the year that he had the fur trading location here in this area?
In Reed's?
Yeah.
Ooh, I had it last.
Probably the 1830s sometime, huh?
It was before Reed's and before, but he was only there as an agent. It was just a shanty. I can look it up, I think, but I don't have it there. Anyway, then this is his son. This is the one that was Reed's, and he was this is the first resident of Wabasha, first permanent resident. Was St. Philip the Elder. Yeah, senior. Now, this is his son, and he was down here at the Y and several other places. And he married a Sioux. And that was my grandmother. And this is, of course, Ebersol. Came from Switzerland. Came over from Switzerland. Had 4 brothers and a sister over there. And the lady died early. We went over to find out. The daughter and I went over a couple of years ago to find out for some first cousins. There was 4 men. We went to a little village thing, and they had this thing, brought out the book, handwritten book. And here was 4 guys left over there with my grandfather. None of them married. No kidding. But there was a lot of Ebersols. Ebersol it was. And we looked it up on the map and found out where Ebersol was, and so found out. And this person at the little office there, she said, up the mountain. So we said, okay, where do we go? She said, you'll never find it. So she took us up there, a lady. And she spoke English. Young people spoke English at that time. And it was way at the top. Here was Aberson. And we got to sit in the old house where the grandfather had come from.
Oh, wow.
And they were real welcome signs. She said, if you have an extra day, I'll take you out in the boat. and there it was written all out, where they were born, where they moved, and they say that as long as you're a resident of Switzerland, you're on the books. And but that's the well. This is my mother was a Taney, Valentine Taney, Mike Taney, and so forth. And then Rudy T was the second son. Now John, some of you know John Puffs Taney, and from out of Tail. My dad, Carl Ebersol married an Indian also, but she passed away. And that was John Ebersol's family. Well, he married, Carl Ebersol married, the second wife was also an Indian, a sister to the first one. And that's our split, the Ebersols. There was only 3 from our family, but there's a whole bunch of them from the other side. But that's it. And of course, they came from Switzerland with that. And this is my wife and I, and this is my daughter. And
You gotta make sure that we got that whole record of that up in our genealogical record
I got a new
at
one
the
now.
county office.
I got a new one.
Good.
I gave you one,
Yeah.
but it was incomplete. And I'll show you what the
And that rope name, he was one of the first contacts that Tommy Holmes had when he first got into this area. And he was the first
Take a look
person
at
there.
that.
Yeah,
This is the Ebersols.
yeah, that's great. That's great.
You take a hold, I'll string it out to you.
And make sure that we've got that in our files.
Now this is all from that first marriage to the first Indian,
Yeah.
Ebersol. And ours goes, that's all one family there. And this is my dad's part of it. 3 boys. And from here to here, see? The same guy up here. Some guy did that from, well, you probably know Dale.
Must have been good habitat to get.
Well, I'll tell you,
Did Dale do that?
it was from on that farm up there in Tail. You know where Hans Ebersol
That's
lives?
right.
Was that Dale's?
Yeah,
Did Dale
this is
make that
Dale's. Dale made
from
this up.
Indiana?
Yeah. And Dale's on the other side of our half brother
Yep.
of our family. But they're all on there.
Dr. Eversole in there too then?
Yeah,
Dr. Eversole in there?
yeah, he's from Huss. Yeah. My dad's name was Rudy and so was his. And they all lived in the farm with the house.